an instrument I was to use. My eyes are made the fools of the other senses.
Smell of the blood still! All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweep this little heart!
Oh, you won't tie the winds and let them fight against the churches. That's tied me to a stake. I cannot fly, but bear life, I must fight the cause.
The very first time we all met up was kind of hilarious and fascinating. And one of the things that became clear was that any experience that you'd had playing other instruments was going to be helpful, but it wasn't going to be the whole thing.
Now we've moved on to the bipolar phase.
And another sound which kind of emerges out of that and kind of
Quite a few, quite a
lifts off
high
from
one
it.
might do that.
Yeah.
So you play as long as possible on the springs,
Yeah.
and then comfortably move to your clarinet position, I think.
I think music and theatre is a quite specific project, from no music at all or one instrumentalist up to a large-scale orchestra. And it all really depends on the story and on the director's take on that story. Rufus was describing a world in the future, a post-apocalyptic kind of world, shaken by catastrophe and by war, which features a lot of plastic, there is a lot of steel, there is kind of an industrial feel to it. Bringing that together, you're already describing a kind of instrument, you're already describing a kind of sound. We started thinking about how can we use what is in this particular world to build instruments. What would the musicians of this world play?
Yeah, let's start with the other wall.
That was my first trip to the music room in the National Theatre. It was definitely a kind of like, whoa, what's going to go on here experience, in that everything was really kind of baffling.
And is there one that we could, so that we can compare them all?
And then
Once more?
the more it gets coiled, the easier it is to play.
And Simon had got all these little bits of things to try, and we didn't really know what any of them would sound like or whether they would work. That was definitely like being plunged into a totally other environment in a very exciting way, but with no idea of what the outcome would be.
This feels like really similar, but obviously fairly different. That kind of pitch is very effective, and I could maybe...
The first job of a musician is to listen. When you apply yourself to a newly made instrument, what's exciting about it is the dialogue you have with the object in your hand. Because of the physics of the way these things work, if you go very low, inside that sound there are all sorts of possibilities that are much higher. And they're not particularly stable. They're quite difficult to control. Your ear guides you to learn to control them and to manipulate them. And that's a really enticing process for a creative musician.
You know, it's very fragile, and I think that's really rather wonderful. It's really lovely to be playing something that isn't conventional, and you have to really, really work in a different way to get the best out of it.
Rhinoceros or something, but a kind of ancient rhinoceros.
To be given the space to do that is really great, absolutely great.
That's it, just experiment with how you tilt it. Yeah. I've got my own personal fountain.
For me, it was a completely different way of thinking about composition. Normally, I write for instruments that I know. In this case, it's more a question of listening very carefully to what Simon's instruments do and somehow incorporating that into the music that we made. That's the sound. That's an amazing sound.
I think one of the important things about the instruments made from Macbeth is that they slide very easily between what's seen as more traditionally musical and more traditionally sound design, and morph from one to the other. In fact, the distinction starts to dissipate.
I can get the same pitch as that.
Lovely.
For us, the question was, how can we capture that excitement of a one-off kind of sound that kind of happens in the moment? How can we put it in a production? And for my feeling, the trick that Simon played was the strings. It's a thing that is a very personal thing to him. It's an instrument that he uses in his gigs, in his concerts as a percussionist. And it was the key for us to say, okay, that thing we can control, and it is very visual, and we can blow it up in scale. That's the goal of this kind of experimentation.
As we go along.
And does it come out when Sarah starts her screaming?
I think it might.
What I know is inside the instrument is only that much. There's also that much that the player knows is inside there, and then there's a whole lot of other stuff that you discover together. Every little surface has got something in it. There's some little bells at the top. You offer up an instrument as a sort of gift to the player, and the player brings it to life. I think we found an ending.